The scream cut through Blackwood Canyon like a knife through silence. Jake Morrison had heard plenty of screams in his 38 years. Men dying in the war, animals caught in traps, women in childbirth. But this one was different. This one came from underground. He reined in his horse at the canyon's edge, listening. The sound came again, muffled by earth and stone, desperate and raw. Someone was buried alive down there, and they were running out of air. Jake had been riding hard for 3 days, putting distance between himself and the mess he'd left in Silvertown. The last thing he needed was another problem, but the scream came a third time, weaker now, and something in his chest twisted tight. He swung down from his saddle and followed the sound to a fresh mound of dirt near the canyon wall. The earth was loose, recently disturbed, and when he pressed his ear to the ground, he could hear scratching, fingernails against wood. A coffin. Jesus, he breathed, grabbing the shovel from his pack. He dug like a man possessed, dirt flying behind him in steady streams. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls red as blood, and with each shovel full, he pulled away. The scratching grew more frantic. His blade hit wood with a solid thunk. A coffin, sure enough, buried maybe 4 feet down. He cleared the dirt from the lid and heard a voice, weak, hoarse, but alive. Please. Please, someone. Jake grabbed his pry bar and cracked the lid open. Inside was a young woman, maybe 25, her dress torn, her face streaked with tears and dirt. Her eyes were wild with terror, but when she saw him, hope flared like a struck match. "You're real," she whispered. I thought I was going to die down there." Jake pulled her from the coffin, his hands gentle despite their roughness. She collapsed against him, shaking like a leaf in a storm. "Who did this to you, Haish?" he asked. Her answer came in a voice filled with rage that surprised him. "The Cartwright brothers, and they're coming back to make sure the job's done." Her name was Eleanor Vasquez, and she had a story that made Jake's blood run cold. The Cartwright brothers, Sam, Billy, and their half-breed tracker, Crow, owned most of Perdition Valley through fear and bullets. Eleanor's father had owned a small ranch on Goodwater, and when he refused to sell, they'd made him an offer he couldn't refuse. They'd killed him, shot him down in broad daylight in front of the whole town. But Elena had seen it happen, and she'd been fool enough to tell the territorial marshal when he came through. "So they decided to bury you alive," Jake said, helping her wash the dirt from her face with water from his canteen. "Make you disappear so there'd be no witness." Elena nodded, her dark eyes flashing with fury. "They wanted me to suffer first, said they'd come back in the morning to dig me up and make sure I was dead. Then they'd move the body somewhere it would never be found." Jake looked at the sky. Full dark now, stars coming out like scattered diamonds. "How long till morning?" "Maybe 8 hours." He was quiet for a long moment, thinking. He could load her on his horse and ride hard, put 50 miles between them and this place by dawn. It was the smart play, the safe play. But Jake Morrison had never been particularly smart or safe. "You know how to shoot?" he asked. Eleanor wiped dirt from her eyes. "My father taught me." Jake nodded and walked to his horse, pulling a rifle from his saddle scabbard. He checked the action, made sure it was loaded, and handed it to her. "Then I reckon we'll give the Cartwright brothers a surprise when they come calling." Eleanor took the rifle, her hands steady despite everything she'd been through. "You don't know them. They're killers, all 3 of them." "So am I," Jake said simply. "Difference is, they bury innocent women alive. That makes them the kind of men who need killing." He began gathering wood for a fire, his movements calm and methodical. Elena watched him, this stranger who'd pulled her from a grave and was now preparing to fight 3 killers on her behalf. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you doing this?" Jake struck a match and touched it to the kindling. The flames caught, throwing light across his weathered face. "Because some lines you don't cross, and burying a woman alive." He shook his head. "That's way over the line." They built the fire in the open, making no attempt to hide it. Jake wanted the Cartwright brothers to see it, to know exactly where they were. Let them come thinking they had the advantage of surprise, only to find their prey waiting with teeth bared. Elena sat across from him, the rifle across her knees, watching the canyon rim. She'd cleaned up as best she could, but there was still dirt under her fingernails, still the smell of grave earth in her hair. Jake had offered her his spare shirt, and it hung loose on her frame, but it was clean, and it covered the tears in her dress. "Tell me about them," Jake said. "I need to know what we're facing." Elena's jaw tightened. "Sam's the leader. Smart, careful, mean as a rattlesnake. He'll think this through, try to find an angle. Billy's the youngest, maybe 19, but he's got a streak of crazy in him. He likes hurting people." She paused, staring into the fire. "And Crow. Crow's the worst. Half Apache, half something else. He can track a ghost over solid rock, and he kills quiet as smoke." Jake nodded, filing the information away. "How will they come?" "Depends on what they think when they see the fire. If they think I escaped on my own, they might just ride in shooting, but if they suspect someone helped me..." Eleanor looked at him across the flames. "Crow will circle around, try to get behind us. Sam will come from the front with Billy, make noise, keep us distracted." "Good to know." Jake checked his revolver, spun the cylinder, hatch, holstered it again. "You ever kill a man?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. "No. Might have to tonight." "I know." Her voice was steady, but Jake could see the fear in her eyes. Not fear of dying, fear of what she might have to become to stay alive. A coyote yipped somewhere in the distance, and Elena tensed. "Easy," Jake said. "That was real. When Crow makes his move, you'll know it." They waited in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them. Jake found himself studying Elena's face in the firelight, strong cheekbones, full lips, eyes that held depths of pain and anger but hadn't gone hard yet. She was beautiful, but it was her strength that impressed him. Most women would have been sobbing or catatonic after what she'd been through. Elena was ready for war. "They'll come soon," she said quietly. Jake nodded. "Let them come." The attack came just before midnight. Jake heard them first, the soft whisper of boots on stone, the creak of leather, the metallic click of a gun being cocked. He touched Eleanor's arm, and she nodded, sliding away from the fire into the shadows. Sam Cartwright stepped into the firelight first, his hands empty but his coat swept back to show the pistol on his hip. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders, with pale eyes and a beard shot through with grey. He smiled when he saw Jake sitting by the fire. "Well, well, looks like our little bird found herself a champion." Jake didn't move, didn't reach for his gun. "You boys are early. Eleanor said you wouldn't be back till morning." "Eleanor, is it?" Sam's smile widened. "Where is the little bitch, hiding behind you like the coward she is?" Billy emerged from the darkness on the other side of the fire, younger than Sam, but with the same pale eyes and the same cruel smile. He had a rifle in his hands and was already sighting down the barrel at Jake's chest. "I vote we just shoot him and get on with it," Billy said. "No point in talking." But Sam held up a hand. "Now hold on, Billy. This here's interesting. A stranger rides into our business, digs up our problem, thinks he can set things right." He looked at Jake with something like curiosity. "You got a name, stranger?" "Jake Morrison." "Well, Jake Morrison, you picked the wrong fight on the wrong night. See, that woman you're protecting is a murderer, killed her own daddy, then tried to blame it on us. We were just doing our civic duty, cleaning up the trash." Jake's laugh was dry as dust. "That's a hell of a story, Sam. Too bad nobody's going to be alive to tell it come morning." Sam's smile faded. Big words for a man sitting by a fire with 2 guns pointed at him. 2 guns? Jake shook his head. "I count 3. That's when Crow made his mistake. The half-breed had circled around behind them, quiet as a shadow, and was creeping up on Eleanor's position. But Eleanor had moved after Jake's warning, and when Crow reached the spot where she'd been, he found empty air and the muzzle of a rifle pressed against the back of his neck. "Drop it," Eleanor said quietly. Crow froze, his knife halfway out of its sheath. The tableau held for a heartbeat, Sam and Billy with their guns on Jake, Eleanor with her rifle on Crow. Then Sam's face twisted with rage. "Shoot him!" he shouted at Billy, but Jake was already moving. Jake rolled left as Billy's rifle cracked, the bullet splitting the air where his head had been a second before. He came up with his revolver in his hand, the hammer already falling. His shot took Billy center mass, spinning the young man around and dropping him into the dirt. Sam was fast, faster than Jake had expected. His pistol cleared leather in a smooth motion, and Jake felt the wind of the bullet as it passed his ear. He fired again, and Sam staggered, but didn't go down. Blood spread across the front of his shirt, but his gun was still in his hand. Behind them, Eleanor was struggling with Crow. The half-breed was stronger than he looked, and he'd gotten his hands on her rifle. They rolled in, the dirt fighting for control of the weapon, and Jake could hear Eleanor's sharp gasps as Crow tried to get his hands around her throat. Sam fired again, and this time Jake felt the bullet tear through his shoulder, spinning him around. Hot blood ran down his arm, but he kept his feet, kept his gun up. Sam was grinning through the blood on his lips, already lining up his next shot. "Should have minded your own business, Morrison." Jake's shot caught Sam between the eyes, and the big man dropped like a felled tree. But the fight wasn't over. Crow had gotten the rifle away from Elena and was bringing it around to bear on Jake. Elena grabbed for it, managed to spoil his aim, and the shot went wide, but Crow backhanded her across the face, sending her sprawling, and now he had a clear shot at Jake. Jake's revolver was empty. He reached for his spare, but his wounded shoulder slowed him down. Crow's rifle was already swinging toward him, the half-breed's finger tightening on the trigger. The shot echoed across the canyon, and Jake waited for the bullet to hit. Instead, Crow's rifle flew from his hands, and the half-breed staggered backward, clutching his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers, and his eyes went wide with shock. Elena stood behind him, smoking Derringer in her hand, her face streaked with tears and dirt and blood. Crow looked at her, then at the small gun in her hand, then down at the spreading stain on his shirt. He opened his mouth to speak, but only blood came out. He fell forward onto his face and didn't move again. The silence after the gunshots was deafening. Jake reloaded his revolver with shaking hands, his wounded shoulder sending spikes of pain down his arm. Eleanor stood over Crow's body, the Derringer still smoking in her grip, her face pale but determined. "You hurt bad?" she asked, moving toward Jake. He flexed his shoulder, wincing. "I'll live." Bullet went clean through. He looked at the Derringer in her hand. "Where the hell did that come from?" Eleanor managed a weak smile. "My father gave it to me. Said a woman should always have a sword." Surprise for men who underestimate her. She looked down at Crow's still form. "I guess it worked." Jake walked to where Billy lay sprawled in the dirt. The young man was still breathing, but barely. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, and pink foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth. He looked up at Jake and tried to speak. "Please," he whispered. Don't let me die like this." Jake knelt beside him, his face impassive. "You helped bury a woman alive, boy. Far as I'm concerned, you're getting better than you deserve." Billy's eyes widened, then went still. Jake stood, walking to Sam's body. The outlaw leader was definitely dead, his pale eyes staring sightlessly at the star-filled sky. Jake began going through the man's pockets, finding a thick roll of bills and a gold watch. "Blood money," he said, tossing the roll to Elena. "Figure your daddy's ranch is worth that much at least." Elena caught the money, stared at it for a moment, then tucked it into her shirt. "What now?" Jake looked around at the three bodies, then at the dying fire. "Now we get the hell out of here. These three might have friends, and I don't fancy explaining this to a territorial judge. Where will you go?" Jake shrugged, immediately regretting it as pain shot through his shoulder. "Mexico, maybe, or California, somewhere far from here." He looked at her. "What about you?" Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "I don't know. My father's dead, the ranch is burned, and everyone in Perdition Valley either worked for the Cartwrights or was too scared to cross them." She looked up at him. "I don't have anywhere to go." Jake studied her face in the dying firelight. She was strong, this woman, stronger than most men he'd known. She'd been through hell tonight, but she was still standing, still thinking, still planning for tomorrow. "California's nice this time of year," he said quietly. Elena's smile was like sunrise. "Is that an invitation?" "Might be." They buried Eleanor in the coffin that had been meant for her, weighing it down with rocks, so any curious travelers would think the grave was still occupied. Let the Cartwright brothers stay dead and buried, while Elena Vasquez rode off into a new life. Jake's shoulder was stiffening up, but Elena had found medical supplies in Sam's saddlebags and done a decent job of cleaning and bandaging the wound. She worked with steady hands, her touch gentle but efficient. "You done this before?" Jake asked as she tied off the bandage. "My father was hurt in the war, lost his left arm at Antietam. I learned to tend wounds by necessity." Jake nodded. Another piece of her story, another reason to respect this woman who'd crawled out of her own grave with fire in her eyes. They'd taken the best horse from the Cartwright string, a sturdy bay mare that looked like she had some miles left in her. Jake's own mount would carry double for now, but they'd need to find Elena a proper horse before they got too far from civilization. "You sure about this?" Eleanor asked as they prepared to ride. "You don't know me. For all you know, I could be exactly what Sam said, a murderer who killed her own father." Jake looked at her for a long moment. She met his gaze steadily, no flinching, no looking away. "Did you?" "No." "Then I know enough." They rode out of Blackwood Canyon as the moon was setting, heading west toward the distant mountains. Behind them, 3 graves marked the end of the Cartwright brothers' reign of terror. Ahead lay California and the promise of a fresh start. "Tell me about California," Eleanor said as they rode. "Orange groves far as the eye can see, towns where nobody asks your name or cares about your past, ocean so blue it hurts to look at it." Jake's voice was soft, almost dreamy. "A man could start over there. A woman too, if she had the grit for it." Eleanor laughed, and it was the first time Jake had heard her laugh. It was a good sound, full of life and possibility. "I think I might have the grit for it." They rode through the night, 2 souls fleeing their past and racing toward an uncertain future. But for the first time in years, Jake Morrison wasn't running from something. He was running toward it. 3 days later, they were riding through broken country when the dust cloud appeared on their back trail. Jake had been expecting it. Word traveled fast in the territory, and the Cartwrights had friends who wouldn't let their deaths go unanswered. "How many?" Eleanor asked, shading her eyes against the sun. Jake studied the dust through his spyglass. 6, maybe 7, and they're pushing their horses hard. They were in bad country for a running fight, open ground with little cover, rocky soil that would slow their horses. But ahead, maybe 5 miles, Jake could see a line of cottonwoods that meant water and possibly defensible ground. "Can we reach the trees?" Eleanor asked. "Not with them pushing us this hard." Jake folded his spyglass and slipped it back into his saddlebag. "We're going to have to make a stand." Eleanor nodded grimly. She'd changed in the 3 days since Blackwood Canyon. The soft woman who'd wept in his arms was gone, replaced by someone harder, more focused. Someone who'd learned that sometimes survival meant doing terrible things with a steady hand. They found their ground in a cluster of red rocks that offered some protection and a good field of fire. Jake hobbled the horses behind the largest boulder and checked his weapons. His shoulder was healing, but it still pulled when he raised his rifle. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "if this goes bad..." She cut him off. "It won't go bad. We're not the same people they're expecting to find." Jake looked at her, really looked. She was right. The woman who'd been buried alive was gone. In her place was someone who'd faced death and chosen to fight instead of submit. Someone who'd killed to protect what mattered and slept easy afterward. "No," he agreed, "we're not." The riders came into view, spread out in a loose line, moving cautious now that they'd lost the element of surprise. Jake recognized the man in the center, Tom Fletcher, one of the Cartwrights' lieutenants. The others were hired guns, hard men who killed for money and asked no questions. Fletcher called out when they were still 100 yards away. "Morrison, we know you're in there. Send out the girl and we might let you ride away." Jake's answer was a rifle shot that kicked up dust at Fletcher's horse's feet. The animal shied, nearly dumping its rider, and the other gunmen scattered for cover. "Guess that's a no," Fletcher shouted and opened fire. The fight was sharp and brutal. The gunmen had numbers, but Jake and Elena had position and motivation. Jake's rifle cracked steadily, picking off targets with the patience of an experienced soldier. Elena was learning fast, her shots growing more accurate as the fight went on. Two of the gunmen tried to flank them from the left, crawling through the scattered rocks on their bellies. Elena spotted them first, her rifle barking twice in quick succession. One man screamed and rolled into the open, clutching his leg. The other went still and quiet. "Behind you!" Elena shouted. Jake spun to find Fletcher himself climbing up the backside of their position, pistol in hand. The outlaw lieutenant was fast, but Jake was faster. His shot took Fletcher in the chest, slamming him backward into the rocks. But Fletcher wasn't done. With his dying breath, he triggered his pistol, and Jake felt the bullet tug at his shirt as it passed. Elena's rifle cracked again, and Fletcher's head snapped back, his pale eyes going blank. The remaining gunmen broke then, their leader dead, their numbers cut in half. They mounted up and rode hard for the horizon, leaving their wounded behind. Jake slumped against the rocks, his shoulder throbbing. Elena moved from body to body, checking to make sure they were all dead. Her face was calm, professional, but Jake could see the cost in her eyes. "It's over," he said quietly. Elena nodded, but her grip on the rifle didn't loosen. "For now." "Elena," Jake's voice was gentle. "It's over. They're gone." She looked at him then, really looked, and he saw the woman beneath the killer she'd become, the fear she'd been hiding, the uncertainty, the terrible knowledge of what she was capable of when pushed. "Who am I now?" she asked in a small voice. "I've killed 4 men in 3 days. I don't even recognize myself." Jake stood, walked to her, took the rifle from her hands. "You're Elena Vasquez. You're a fighter. You're someone who won't quit when the world tries to bury her." He paused. "You're someone worth riding to California with." She leaned against him then, and he held her with his good arm, feeling the tremor that ran through her body. She wasn't broken, not Elena, but she was human, and humans had limits. "Is it always like this?" she asked. "Fighting and killing and running?" "No," Jake said, and he meant it. "Sometimes it's orange groves and blue ocean and nobody asking questions you don't want to answer." Elena pulled back, looked into his eyes. "Promise me." "What?" "Promise me California. Promise me peace." Jake Morrison, who'd never made a promise he couldn't keep, looked at this woman who'd crawled out of her own grave and chose to live and made the easiest vow of his life. "I promise." 6 months later, Jake stood in the doorway of their small house, watching Elena hang laundry on the line. The Pacific Ocean sparkled in the distance, blue as any dream, and orange trees heavy with fruit dotted the valley. The scar on his shoulder ached when it rained, but it was a small price for paradise. Elena had changed again, softened without losing her strength. She wore her hair long now, and she smiled more often, though Jake sometimes caught her staring at the eastern horizon with old pain in her eyes. Some wounds never fully healed, but they could learn to live with them. She'd taken his name when they married, though whether the preacher who'd performed the ceremony was legal in California was anybody's guess. Jake figured it didn't matter. What mattered was the ring on her finger and the way she said husband when she introduced him to their neighbors. They'd bought the small ranch with the Cartwrights' blood money and what little Jake had saved from his years of drifting. It wasn't much, a house, a barn, 20 acres of good soil and a creek that never ran dry. But it was theirs, bought and paid for, with no ghosts attached. Elena looked up from her laundry and smiled at him, and Jake felt the familiar tightening in his chest that came with loving someone more than your own life. "Supper's almost ready," she called. "You coming in?" "In a minute." Jake looked east one more time, toward the territory they'd left behind, toward the graves in Blackwood Canyon and the life Eleanor had buried there. Sometimes riders came through asking questions about a woman and a gunfighter who'd killed the Cartwright brothers. Jake always told them the same thing, never heard of them. The past was dead and buried, just like it should be. He turned his back on the east and walked toward his wife, toward their house, toward the life they'd built from blood and ashes, and the simple decision to keep fighting when the world tried to break them. Eleanor met him at the door, and he kissed her like it was the first time, tasting sunshine and orange blossoms and the sweet certainty of tomorrow. Behind them, the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky red and gold and full of promise, and for the first time in his life, Jake Morrison was exactly where he wanted to be.